Hey guys, so I'm going to walk you through how to sew my new bra pattern. It's called the Romy Bra. And I'm going to show you here how to sew it with scalloped lace detail along the neckline. And I'm sewing mine entirely out of sheer stretch mesh, but I'm using two layers on the front two cut pieces. So what I've done is I've actually cut 4 of the center front, 4 of the side front, 2 of the back band, and 2 of the lace front. I've already assembled this side here, so you can see it's got a nice clean finish. All of my seams are encased between the 2 layers, and I've used the same mesh on the front and back so that I get a nice sheer look. I'm going to start with my center front piece. Just going to take one of those away. And I'm going to take my line or my lace and I'm going to place it against my first layer of mesh so that the right sides are together. And I've notched here so I can line those notches up. So that gets sewn along like that. You can baste it on at this point if you want to. And then we take our second piece of mesh, which is going to end up being the lining, and it gets laid over top, and then we stitch down here. I'm just going to really quickly run this through my serger. So that's what it looks like as soon as I'm done stitching it together. You don't have to use a serger. You could use a zigzag stitch or another straight stitch, but I find it's just as quick just to send it through the serger. And then when you open it up, that seam is encased between those 2 layers. Now that our center front piece is assembled with the scalloped lace and the lining, you might want to understitch. So working from the lining side, you would just stitch the seam allowance using about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and that just helps the lining fold towards the back. I'm not going to do that here, just because I would like to be quick, but it is something that I will often do. So once we have our front piece assembled, we're going to just treat this piece as one solid piece from now on, and we're going to sew on the side front. So I'm just putting right sides of the mesh together, and I'm going to flip it over and put the other piece of the side front mesh that way. So basically what we have is the center front sandwiched between the 2 side front layers. So I'm going to run that through my serger. So here's that once I've stitched it together, and when we peel back each of the layers, you can see how that seam is nicely encased between the lining and the exterior, which makes kind of a nice seam-free cup. So now we're to the point where we're going to attach the band along this side seam, and this is the trickiest part of the whole bra in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I've just got this exterior layer of the side front. I've folded the other half, the lining half, back. And I'm going to lay the band along that side seam so that my notches are matching up. I'm going to roll the center front back, and here's my side front lining. I'm going to wrap it around and match that seam up. So I've got kind of a wrap happening here. All of the rest of my bra, the center front piece and the band, are all wrapped in between my 2 side front layers. So when you've got that stitched together, you have this really kind of twisted mess. And basically what it is you've got your center front piece and your band between your side front lining and exterior fabric, which in this case is both made out of stretch mesh. But once I turn this right side out, there, that seam is now in between those two layers. So it's a really nice finish. Now that both sides are sewn together, you can pin it together down the center front, so just make sure that your seams line up and that your scalloped edge at the top at the neckline lines up as well. So I'm actually going to run this through my sewing machine and then my serger. I'm going to serge my seam allowance together and just press it to one side. I would recommend pinning this seam. I'm just skipping that step for speed. So I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance in pretty much all of my patterns, which is pretty generous for lingerie making, but it just makes things a little bit easier for those of you who might be newer to sewing. So I've sewn that together and now I'm going to serge my seam allowance. And this is what our bra looks like so far. It's got a nice scoop neckline with some nice shaping through the seams. At this point I'm going to sew on the band elastic. So I'm using a 1/2 inch band elastic and I've got the plush side up. It's going to run just along, we're going to stitch it along the bottom here using a zigzag stitch. I'm just using a regular zigzag stitch. It's about a medium width. And I'm pulling on my elastic as I sew it on. I don't give a finish length of the elastic. I know in some bra patterns you will find that. I just find that there can be a lot of variation in the amount of stretch in a band elastic. There's also how tight you like it is going to be a personal preference as well. So I just recommend experimenting. The most important part, I would say, is that you just keep your tension even as you're going all the way across the band. And that applies to any elastic. So now that that is sewn on to the right side of my bra with the plush side facing up, I'm going to trim back the excess fabric and my extra threads. Now working from the front, I'm going to fold the band elastic under and I'm going to use a multi-step zigzag stitch. And I'm going to top stitch that down. So that's our band elastic. The next portion is going to be applying some fold over elastic along this underarm portion of the bra. So working from the wrong side or the inside, I'm going to start at this point on the band. And the fold line of the elastic should run approximately alongside the cut edge. Whoops. Just switch back to a regular zigzag stitch. And again, I'm gently pulling on the elastic. When I get to this scalloped part, I'm actually going to extend the fold over elastic beyond this point by about an inch, and I'm going to back tack here. This is going to be where our front strap gets attached. Okay, so now that that fabric is trimmed back, we're just going to fold the elastic towards the garment so that it's binding that raw edge, and use a zigzag stitch to sew it in place. So now our bra is looking something like this. We've got band elastic along the lower edge, fold over elastic along the underarm edge with approximately a 1-inch tail extending beyond the cup, and make sure you've back tacked here over your fold over elastic too, just because this can be a weak point. The next step is to put a little bit of strap elastic along this curved seam. So working from the right side, I'm putting my strap elastic on so that I've got the right side facing up, and I'm going to use a tight zigzag stitch. And I'm stitching so that the stitching line is going right along this lower edge of the strap elastic. So I've anchored it in place with a little back tack. And although although the strap elastic is quite firm, I am really gently kind of pulling on it to just stabilize this area. And it is going to extend right beyond our fold over elastic. Back tack here. And then cut it back so you've got about an inch overhang, an inch tail. There. So this is where our strap is going to get attached. You can see from the back, we can just trim back our excess fabric. So I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. So starting on this side, so I've got an overhang or a tail extending beyond that fold over elastic. Secure it with a back tack. I'm going to just quickly trim this back. And there we are. So I've already made a couple of straps. So there's a couple of ways that you can attach these straps. You can attach them with a ring on the front, so you could just put a ring around this tail and do a really tight zigzag stitch to anchor the tail in place. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the strap directly on. So with the right side of the strap facing the right side of your garment. Use a narrow stitch to just stitch it onto the tail as close to the garment as you can get. So once that gets sewn on there, just flip it up so that the seam allowance is under, and you can run a narrow row of zigzag stitches along here. So I'm going to attach the other strap. Again, just stitch it onto the tail close to the garment. Switch to a narrow zigzag stitch. Flip the little tail and the seam allowance, or the allowance of the strap down, and just top stitch right across. I go about 1/4 of an inch from that join line. Back tack so it's nice and secure. And I'm gonna do the opposite side at the same time. So I've just trimmed back that tail that extended beyond where I zigzag stitched. So that is a really nice way, I find, to add a strap without a ring. So my strap that I assembled earlier, it does have a ring on one end, and we just insert that little tail on our band, fold it under, and then you can zigzag stitch across here to anchor it in place. So I'm going to do that on both sides. All right, so now that both of our straps are assembled and applied, I'm just going to trim back some of these threads. We can sew on, now we can sew on our bra back. So my bra back looks like this. It's pocket style. So I'm going to work from the right hand side, and I'm going to take my hook side with my hooks facing up, and I'm just going to insert that end into here. Now before you do this, you might want to just wrap the bra around you and see how it fits. You might want to trim it back a little bit. Before you put the clasp on, you should have a very, very small gap between the center back. And it should fit snug but comfortable. So I'm moving my needle over to the right, and just make sure to take it off zigzag if you're doing a straight stitch to apply it, and back tack at the beginning and end. So on the opposite side, it gets inserted into the eye side of the closure. And there it is.